guys, welcome to another Brushmaster video. Let's watch part 2. Welcome to another Brushmaster video, and this is part 2 in the series of the Jailer. And in this part we're going to be painting all the cloth elements on the miniature. I wanted these to be quite sort of dour and faded, and I didn't want them to be oversaturated and bright. So I've mixed up quite a sort of dull reddish brown colour here, which is made of brick red and pistachio from AK Interactive. And the idea here is just going to give this a very good thin covering of this paint to give us a base coat to work from. I actually really like the way this colour turned out, so it's something that I think works really well in context of the miniature, and that's something that's always quite important to remember when you're painting. If I'd have painted these cloths in quite bright saturated colours, it would have sort of gone against the atmosphere and the feel of the miniature, so I've tried to keep it quite desaturated and sort of, you know, an underwhelming colour, but it's got nice contrast, and it got some nice poppy parts in it which make it look pretty cool. So for the first highlight here, I've added in more pistachio, and this colour is really interesting because we're basing in using brick red, which is a red, and I'm highlighting adding pistachio, which is a sort of limey yellow green colour. Now the green in this colour helps this colour tie in with the skin and the overall palette, I think. And obviously green is the perfect complement to red, so pistachio works really nice as a mixing colour with reds, and this tone comes out really nice. It's obviously a little bit brighter in value, but it works really well to highlight this cloth. And the mix here, it's probably 1-to-1 water to paint. It's thinnish, it flows, but it's not glaze consistency, it's not overly thin. It's just right for putting on highlights. And I don't worry too much about blending or brush strokes at this stage in the painting process, because anytime I paint something like this, I always know that I can come back and blend it later with glazes or feathering type of thing. So when you're painting things like this, don't get caught up with making everything ultra smooth and blending it. It takes very little effort to glaze and to knock something back later on and smooth the transitions. As you can see here, the more layers I add, the brighter this highlight becomes. It almost looks a bit of a whitish feel to it now, although it's definitely not. It's just the way that this colour is appearing against this base colour. But in terms of intensity and value, this is one of the ways to layer. So you paint fairly thin layers on, and the highlight will go to a certain value. As the paint dries, it will darken. To make it more intense, you just keep adding more layers. You can see by the shoulder part here, it already looks fairly bright in value. And that's because of the many layers it's had, and it then builds up intensity and more light value. So when you put the first layer of highlight on, you can, unless you put it on really thick, if you're adding, you know, smooth layer consistency layers, you can always build up more value by adding more layers. You don't immediately have to add lighter tones in to add light. You can add light by adding more layers. Right, so I'm going to add in my favourite buff to this mix. And as you know, buff I use quite a lot. And one of the reasons for that is it has white in it, but it also has that mix of yellow in it. And this stops the paint from going chalky and quite stark, I find. It's a very light valued paint, but I use it for highlighting so many things, including NMMs, golds, bone, and all sorts of other colours and mixes I add this to. It's one of the most useful colours in my arsenal buff, and you'll see in a lot of my painting that I add it a lot as a highlighting colour and a colour that I use to lighten values. So these final highlights, a lot of them are really just on the edges and little cuts and scratches that I add to add some sort of texture and weathering to the cloth. But as you can see, the final values now is quite bright. We're getting up to quite a bright sort of value with a lot of this cloth, but it is very desaturated. You know, I'm keeping the cloth very neutral and very earthy, but the contrast from dark to light is there still. So some of the final parts of this was I felt like I'd lost too much colour. I wanted to add a little tiny bit back in here. So I've got a little bit of a glaze with the brick red colour here. And I'm just trying to add a bit more of that into the mid-tone, in between the highlights and the shadows, just to add a little bit of colour. Now I don't want to overdo this because, like I said, I'm trying to keep this quite desaturated. And brick red is quite a desaturated red. It's not a bright, vibrant red. So I'm using this just to add a little bit more depth and a little bit more colour into those deeper, shadowy areas. So now we're on to the bottom parts of the cloth, and although I base coated it with the same colour, I'm going to highlight it slightly differently. So this time I'm going from a purple tone and adding the pistachio into that, which gives me this sort of, it's very similar, it's like an earthy brown tone, but it will look slightly different because of the purple in the colour instead of brick red. So this will probably look a bit more of a pinky tone as I put it on. Right, so I'm adding in even more pistachio to the mix now, and we get this quite nice sort of a muddy sort of yellowy colour now, and this will help to differentiate this cloth from the top cloth. It's quite a light value, and we're just going to build up that lighter value on the uppermost edges. The paint's still fairly thin, like I say, it's sort of a layer texture, sort of consistency, a 1-to-1 paint to water, and I'm just trying to hit the top edges and the parts that are the uppermost part of the model. I won't paint too much down the lower parts under the the belly area, because that would not get a lot of light down there. I may touch a couple of little bits that stand out, but it's mainly on the upper bit around his waist and the back area that's going to get the most light here. So we're going to try and add a little bit more depth and a little bit more colour to this cloth, as we did with the top part. But this time I'm going to come in with amethyst blue, and I'm going to thin this down to a glaze consistency, probably 3 or 4 parts water to 1 part paint. And I wick the paint off the brush, and I'm just glazing it into the darkest areas. So this is going to, like the first bit of cloth, it's going to add that depth and a little bit of vibrancy. Not a great deal, because amethyst blue as well, it's a purpley colour, but it's it's not as saturated as a bright purple. It's more sort of the blue tones in there, which keep it a little bit sort of flatter, in my opinion. It's a beautiful colour. But again, we just want to add a little bit of colour, a little bit of vibrancy, and something to make that contrast a bit higher in value, which will help make the highlights stand out. But it also makes the shadows more interesting. Whenever I paint anything, I very rarely use black as a shadow colour. Mainly only if I did something like steel NMN or something that was of a grayer tone, I may do. But whenever I'm adding shadows to anything, you know, whether it be cloth, skin, even armour a lot of the time, or gold or whatever, I very rarely use black. I find it like completely kills any vibrancy and any colour that I have in shadows. I'll only ever use sort of black for, you know, almost black dark lining and real little tiny bits for extreme shadows, but never too much of it. So I always prefer to use a shadow colour that actually has some sort of vibrancy and tone that will enhance the shadows. So here we're just glazing in. It won't take too much, just a few layers here and there, just to make the shadows just look a little bit more interesting. And as what usually happens is when you darken shadows like this, you increase the contrast and you make the highlighting all of a sudden looks of a higher value because of the difference of the two values. And that's an important thing to remember. When you're highlighting, you don't always have to go super light. If you're going to come back in with shadow work, that will enhance the contrast and make your highlighting look brighter. So here I've mixed up a glaze, which is a sort of purpley colour, which is our original sort of base coat with a little bit of the mix we had going on earlier. So it's sort of the purpley tone plus pistachio. And I'm using this just to glaze now, to smooth the highlight areas out from the shadow areas. And all I'm doing is it's quite liberal this, I'm not being too accurate here. The paint's very thin, sort of 5 or 6 parts water to 1 part paint, and I'm just brushing over these areas into the highlight areas where I can. So I'm trying to start from the shadow zone and pushing the paint towards the end of the highlight areas. And all this is doing, it really adds a nice smoothing effect to everything you've got. Any little sort of transition lines or rough areas that you have, it really helps to smooth it out. And it also has a sort of a mid-tone effect by we're adding something with a little bit of purple in it and a little bit of the base color, and it just sort of evens it out a bit and smooths it all. This is something I do very regularly with paintwork, and I know a lot of painters do the same. It's just that sort of finishing touch to smooth things out. And my last step here was to just come back in with a little thin mix of buff, just to add some little extreme highlights in a couple of places. I just wanted some of these folds just to have a little touch more highlight to make them pop. And this is just the final step in the process, just to give, you know, you often hear painters say that, you know, a little bit pops. And this is all that this is doing. It's adding that very last sharp little bit of colour or highlight or sparkle, whatever you want to call it. Just it makes the area stand out a little bit more and gives it a little something that makes it just pop a little bit. And here's the final result of the cloths, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video, and join me again for part 3 coming soon.